Welcome back to Maghreb in Washington on Median TV, where today we're discussing U.S. relations with the Middle East and particularly the Gulf states. We're joined now by our friend Jason Greenblatt. Jason, you've spent time at President Trump's side in the White House, and you continue to be in contact with leaders throughout the Middle East. Tell us how they view United States policy under President Biden, and do you think he's listening to them?
Well, first of all, it's great to be with you again. I think that it reminds me of when we first started in 2017 hearing the complaints of the leaders about the Obama administration, but actually much worse. After the Obama administration, the region was frustrated and was turning more towards China, and we were a breath of fresh air for them because we understood the dangers that they faced and we were willing to stand by them in meaningful ways. What we're seeing now is not only us not standing by them, but us alienating them. So yes, we say some nice words. We condemn the attacks. There was one this week again on Saudi Arabia from the Houthi terrorists, but we don't do anything to support them. We remove the name terrorists from the Houthi, we call them Houthi rebels, ostensibly because of humanitarian aid. There's a way to continue to call them terrorists and still try to help the people suffering in Yemen. Let's remember what President Biden said as a candidate about Saudi Arabia. He called him a pariah. He said that there's very little redeeming social value in the leadership of Saudi Arabia. We are not only negotiating with Iran, we're negotiating with Iran through European mouths, which is terrible for the United States of America. It doesn't really take into account the needs and interests of the region whatsoever. We're talking about nuclear only, not the missiles that are being launched at the UAE and Saudi Arabia. There's not only so little that we're doing meaningfully to stand by our allies in the Gulf, we're actually doing things in a very negative way. And I can understand why they're frustrated, disappointed, and likely angry at the Biden administration.
Yeah, you make a great point about taking things one step forward and just and alienating them. But, you also have a lot of experience as a negotiator. And as we all know, every negotiation is a process of give and take. Now, across the Arab world, the United States is making demands, or at least requests, of our allies. For example, we want Saudi Arabia and the Emirates to pump more oil in order to stabilize global energy prices. We're also asking Arab states to do more to isolate Russia and to limit ties with China. But, again, in the process of negotiation, what are we doing to address their concerns about Iran's nuclear programs, its support of terror groups like the Houthis and Hezbollah, or offering realistic alternatives to Chinese investment?
I think those are all great points. To me, as I'm watching it, it's take, right?
Yeah.
Treat Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates poorly and ask them to do a whole bunch of things that really aren't in their national interest to do. So I think if President Biden were serious about repairing the relationship with the region and trying to get the things he would like our friends and allies in the Gulf, Saudi Arabia and the Emirates and others to do, he needs to be serious about it. He should pick up the phone and talk to the Crown Prince. They should immediately redesignate the Houthis as terrorists. There's absolutely no excuse for that. And they should involve every country in the region, Saudi, Emiratis, Qataris, Israel, Oman, Bahrain, every one of them, in those negotiations with Iran. This region should be at the front of the table. Their wishes, their thoughts, their desires, their concerns should be front and center at that negotiating table. And if we can't do that, and we only want to rely on the Europeans who have no real help to the United States, they just want to business with Iran, they want to import more oil from Iran, especially now because of Ukraine, they're in an even worse position. And we're going about this all wrong. And I think our relationship will drive them for the lack of a relationship and the disrespect we're showing to the region will drive them further and further into the Chinese arms. And we only have ourselves, or I should say the Biden administration, to blame for that.
Yeah. Well, I think that's really very well said. Now I'm going to ask you to sort of take out your crystal ball and look ahead for the next 2 years that remain, at least in this first term of the Biden administration. Two questions for you. Number one, do you think that the administration will adjust in response to these realities? Or is Biden, as you talked about, so much a prisoner of his campaign rhetoric that he's stuck and can't change?
So it's challenging to tell. Look, I'm not one of these guys that goes on a TV show and attacks people when I don't really know what's going on behind the scenes. My knowledge is limited to what I read and watch on the news, and I'd like to think the answer is yes. The National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan, is a smart guy. I think he could read the tea leaves. I hope that Biden is not dragged down by the left with all the wrong concerns that they have, especially where the world is today. The world is a much less safer place and really like the Wild West today compared to when President Biden came into office. I like to think that he should stop talking to Venezuela. What good is it to talk to Venezuela about oil? Why shouldn't we be energy independent? So I think we may be left with no choice, or the Biden administration may be left with no choice and not happily start to address the region's concerns. They probably will have to do it. What I would really like to see is them recognize the reality on the ground there and happily support our friends and allies in the Middle East, and in particular in the Gulf.
Yeah. Now, I thought Dr. Taki had an interesting point where he said, the sort of seismic shift in international relations with sort of the United States, NATO, and the Europeans judging all its relationships by how countries respond to Russia's invasion of Ukraine really puts our friends like Morocco in a difficult position, doesn't it? On the one hand, they're committed to a strong relationship with the United States. But on the other hand, they have to pursue an independent foreign policy that takes into account the concerns of their fellow Arab states. You know our friends in Morocco. What advice would you have for them as they try to walk this tightrope?
So I'm from the school of President Trump, the America First policy, right? That doesn't mean alienating our friends and allies, but it means while we take their concerns into account, at the end of the day, the leader is the leader of his country or her country, not other countries. So I think the leadership in Morocco, of course, should try its very best to address its allies and friends, in particular in the Gulf and in the Middle East generally. But in the end, the leadership is the leadership of Morocco, and they need to do what's best for Morocco. They could still argue for their friends and allies. They could sit with the Biden administration and explain the concerns. They could be a great conduit, but they still have to make their own independent foreign policy decisions. That's how I see it.
Last question for you, Jason. In your opinion, and you've stated very, I think, eloquently and correctly that in the past 2 years we've seen the United States take steps that really alienate our former allies in the Gulf that you know so well. In your opinion, what do you see as the impact on the United States of the deterioration in these relations?
Well, we could pretend as much as we want that the security in the Middle East isn't our issue. It certainly is. We can't not be involved in the region. So we need to reestablish those contacts with the region to make sure that these countries are safe. I think it's going to be a tall order after the disaster in Afghanistan. We lost a tremendous amount of trust there because everybody could see there, and even a little bit from Ukraine, that we really can't be relied on the way we should be relied on. So I think the way we're going to need to build trust first is in the security space. We need to absolutely take a much stronger hold there and understand the concerns of the region and stop blaming Saudi Arabia and the Emirates for the tragedy in Yemen. Explain that the Yemen is a tragedy, that people are suffering, but they're suffering because of the Houthi terrorists, not because of Saudi Arabia, was the Emirates as well, but now Saudi Arabia defending themselves against these missile attacks and what could be much worse. And we absolutely should not be signing whatever form of this Iran deal that the Biden administration or the Europeans have cooked up. That is terrible for the region, but also terrible for the United States of America. And I don't really care about the Europeans. They're not on the line of fire here. The United States of America could be, Israel and our allies in the Gulf could be. So front and center should be listening to the region and involving them in every decision relating to Iran.